Hey guys, in this episode, the very well respected Bushy Martin and I, we deep dive into what is wrong currently with the Australian property market. There's something lurking, there's something going on, there's a dynamic which is really rupturing the Australian property market. Talking about that, we also look ahead to give you an idea and insight and strategy on how to mitigate your own property approach so that you don't get wrapped up and negatively impacted by what's going on. I think it's a very important episode. I think it's very useful. And I think if you're an owner occupier or a property investor, you're going to want to know what's lurking below the surface of the water and what's really going on so that you can insulate yourself from it. Let's go. I think what gets me up and gets me to create the videos and help my clients and just a general community as well is because I think there's a lack of truth in the property market. I mean, if you just step back even away from the property market, there's a lack of truth in this world, generally speaking. And of course, we all have an agenda, but at least to the extent that I can, to the extent that my intelligence allows, I try to just bring truth into the property market by sharing data.
Let's get started. Hi, freedom fighters. Are you concerned that we're heading into recession? Do you worry that the property market's going to crash? And are you finding yourself getting caught up in the FOMO of chasing properties in favour of the year affordable hotspots like Perth or other areas? If you are, then you're one of a growing stampeding herd that's doing exactly the same. But I have growing and increasing concerns that a lot of property buyers are going to get their fingers burnt with all of this. So what's going on, what's changed, and why is this happening? Because I've seen a significant shift in property buyer activity over the last few years, and I've been trying to make sense out of it. Why are more and more buyers flocking to locations like ants around a piece of meat in a FOMO-fueled feeding frenzy as they compete with each other to buy properties, and as a result, artificially and temporarily push up prices in what becomes a bit of a short-term self-fulfilling prophecy? Because I'm concerned there's going to be a costly sting in the tail to all this. Let me explain. As a closet contrarian, I'm a bit of a disciple of the old Warren Buffett school of investing, where we need to be fearful when others are being greedy and greedy when others are being fearful. And at the moment, I'm fearful about the growing trend of concentrated hotspot activity, where investors are hunting in hyena packs fueled by buyers' agents, and once the carcass of a location has been picked bare and prices have risen sharply, they move on en masse to other short-term feeding grounds, and the hotspots quickly become not spots, with the potential for property prices to soften and then go sideways for extensive periods of time. Now, this is exactly what we've seen in parts of Tasmania in recent years, where property prices burn brightly for a period of time, and then the lights have gone out. And Western Australia and parts of South Australia and other areas are showing signs of doing exactly the same. So what's turning up the volume of these piranha school property parties? I think it's all lying at the intersection of a number of trend changes that revolve around a perfect storm that's been created by the coincidence of data, social media, affordability, supply, and borderless buyers agents. Let me break this down and explain a bit further. Firstly, in the space of under 20 years, we've seen a big shift from virtually no property information to too many accessible metrics, where we've all got instant, ready access to volumes of desktop data. Secondly, the rapid rise of always-on social media platforms means that the AI algorithms selectively concentrate our information diets as property marketers chase us around, and we keep seeing them just about everywhere. Thirdly, reducing affordability and falling purchase price power from interest rate rises, inflation, and lending policy restrictions favour locations and property types that are more affordable and concentrate buyers into a narrow purchase price range. Fourthly, the resulting hotspot areas are experiencing listing supply levels, or the number of properties for sale, that are 20 to 40% below the long-term average, so more buyers are competing for less properties, like seagulls fighting over hot chips. Fifthly, COVID has accelerated nationwide digital access to more virtual property details, along with our increasing comfort with buying properties remotely that are sight unseen, which has resulted in a quick shift in buyer behaviour from local backyard to borderless nationwide, with investors now far more comfortable buying properties anywhere across the country. And finally, the rapid growth in the number of buyers agents, accompanied by the increasing comfort of hard-working, time-poor investors in using them. Now, buyers agents only get paid when they sell your property, so there's subtle pressure from them for you to buy a property sooner rather than later. And as a result, they're more likely to be looking for an excuse to say yes to a property rather than looking for reasons to say no. And the combination of all of these influences is, from my point of view, creating a bit of a caustic cocktail that's likely to burn many investors down the track. So I have growing concerns that a cluster of high-profile buyers agents that attract big audiences are becoming market makers, much like big institutional investors in shares and equities markets will have the ability to drive prices up and down as a result of the power of their trading volumes. Similarly, high-profile buyers agents are using their big social media footprints, along with SEO, to actively chase and ensnare aspiring investors right around the internet. And because they're all relying on the same desktop data, they're shoehorning investors into locations and using FOMO, fear of missing out, to sell investors low-quality, overpriced properties with limited long-term performance potential. Consequently, these piranha feeding frenzies have been developing in locations where all of these buyers agents are concentrating investors, and they end up flogging them untested off-market properties where the buyers agents become little more than mailbox extensions of selling agents to offload overpriced, low-quality properties, with the result that these self-proclaimed and self-fulfilling prophecies of short-term rapid price growth result until the buyers agents desert the location en masse and direct the flock elsewhere. So I'm concerned that investors that are caught in this buyers agent created FOMO and market-moving activity are likely to see property values soften for extended periods of time once the BAs have actually shifted their locational focus, meaning it'll be too late once the investors realise how poor their properties are performing in a few years' time, and by then, the buyers agents will be long gone. So here's a warning. If you're being chased around social media and keep seeing the same high-profile buyers agents pushing the same locations, be very wary of these wolves in sheep's clothing, as they're more likely to be funding their own profits at your long-term expense. Now, I'm not tarring all buyers agents with the same brush here, because there are a number of very good buyers agents out there who add significant value to property purchases, particularly for time-poor and inexperienced investors. And I've actually seen these firsthand. But they're getting lost in the sea of high-profile charlatans and snake oil salesmen that are dominating the airwaves, who sound convincing and tell a great story based on truisms, but what they end up pressuring you to buy doesn't pass the sniff test. And if it sounds too good to be true, it generally is. So the bigger a buyer's agency is and the faster that they've grown, and the more that you're seeing them, the more you need to be concerned, as these are massive flashing red light warning signs and you need to run away and avoid them as quickly as you can. It's why, sadly, our know-how business has been forced to provide you with a unique John Wester property approach, where it's the properties we reject that make sure you get the best, as we sit on your side of the table and vet areas and properties that are being suggested by buyers agents by running a second-level detailed due diligence over them to ensure that a property is truly the best fit for your specific strategy needs. So make sure you follow the old rule that if you're hearing about a state, location or area just about everywhere across the media, then it's already too late. And stop following the impatient herd and start swimming against the tide of popular property opinion. In my humble opinion, you need to shift from being what I call a momentum investor that follows the flock and gets caught up in this short-term FOMO to become a contrarian investor that fishes in quieter pools away from the buyer's agent market makers in locations, property types and price points where the fundamental long-term property growth drivers will outperform. So today I'm keen to discuss this market-making theory along with a number of hot topics on what's happening in property and what you should and shouldn't be doing by enjoying another great conversation with one of our Get Invested favourites, the one and only PK Gupta. PK first joined us back on episodes 268 and 269 when we were swamped with positive feedback. So if you haven't listened to them, make sure you do by clicking the link in the show notes. And if you don't know him, PK is a fellow property investment educator and facilitator that leverages his proven expertise as an active investor who's built a portfolio of residential and commercial property as well as development projects that give him a six-figure passive income. And PK and I share the same mission to educate you on building passive income through property investing done properly. Through his Oz Property Mastery podcast, his YouTube videos, and his Property Investment Accelerator course, PK helps you to learn strategies and gain market insights backed by his data-led system and his experience. He gives you essential tactics to help you buy the top 5% growth and high cash flow properties and grow your portfolio without wasting months doing research, spending all of your weekends at inspections, or spending thousands on buyer's agents. And we're both on the same page in relation to helping you to remove financial stress so that you can do more of the things that you love with the people you love. So I'm really excited to be deep diving in all things property again. So welcome back, and let's get invested again, PK.
Hey, thanks so much, Bushy. I always find our chats to be very laid back, and it's really nice to learn from you as well during our conversations.
Well, I think we learn from each other, PK. What I love about it is we're both open. We're not fixed in our mindsets. We don't think there's only one way. As you and I know, property conditions are always changing, and the dynamics is constantly on the move, which creates a lot of opportunity. But your ability to communicate and share real information untainted by the need to be selling something is almost unique in the current marketplace. And it is why I tend to gravitate to listening to what you've got to share, and it aligns very closely with my own thoughts on the exercise as well. But look, before we sort of get into some of those hot topics that are near and dear to both of our hearts, can I take a bit of a step back and get you to update us on what's been happening in your world, starting with, refreshing us on what you do differently and why you do what you do, please, PK?
Yeah, sure. I think that was a really good introduction, by the way. Thank you. Why I do what I do has changed, I think, a little bit over the years. Initially, when I started teaching others, I simply started because my family and friends started asking me, hey, you seem to have some semblance of success, whether that's true or not back then. Can you just give us a bit of a hand? And, then, it's like a snowball effect. And luckily enough, they got some results. I was just doing it for free, right? And then I was like, oh yeah, this could be some sort of mutually beneficial thing where I can help people. And then it sort of scaled very, very, very quickly. Fast forward, what is it, like 7 or 8 years. I think the reason I do this at the moment, and this is not for me to get on my high horse and be like holier than thou or anything like that, but I think what gets me up and gets me to create the videos and help my clients and just a general community as well is because I think there's a lack of truth in the property market. I mean, if you just step back even away from the property market, there's a lack of truth in this world, generally speaking. We were just talking before, it's like you don't know what's going on, who's right or wrong with various elections. You don't know who's right or wrong with different wars. You don't know who's right or wrong with all sorts of things because everyone's got a different agenda. And of course, we all have an agenda, but at least to the extent that I can, to the extent that my intelligence allows, I try to just bring truth into the property market by sharing data, hopefully minimally my opinions or stripping away my opinions and just sharing data and considered commentary on it. And I think that's it's a little bit something different because data is plentiful these days. Like you said before, data is democratized, which is a good thing, but you can manipulate data to say anything you want, especially if you're a business owner, especially in the lucrative, unregulated world that is Australian property. So, what I really enjoy saying to my clients back in 2020 or 2021, oh, let's start investing in these parts of Perth. But then I really also enjoy saying in late 2023 or early 2024 that, guys, I think I don't think Perth is going to drop by 50%, but I think it might be a little bit overcooked. And don't take me, my opinion for it, but here's a whole bunch of data that suggests things are a bit different. And I'm not saying stop growing all of a sudden or anything like that, but perhaps not the best place to invest. And that kind of flies in the face of probably, to your introduction, what 99.9% of industry professionals say. And I really get a kick out of being a contrarian. I'm not a closet contrarian. I think you introduce yourself as a closet contrarian. I'm pretty out there. And so, you make a lot of frenemies that way. And no, I enjoy it. I enjoy getting a kick out of being right. And, sometimes I'm wrong and that's fine as well. But I enjoy being a bit of a maverick in this space.
I love it. And I guess that's probably why we connect so well, because like you were 3 or 4 years ago, we were encouraging investors to get involved in areas in WA. We stopped that at end of last year. I just felt that it's getting to the dangerous level for the same reasons, looking at the same sort of data, which I think is potentially going to create the issues. But the bit of a lone voice in the exercise when there's so much media noise about it. And that when I see so much media noise, it's always a massive warning sign for me. So I love you sharing that. On yourself, PK, what do people misunderstand about you the most, do you think?
I think there's a really easy way to pigeonhole or categorize someone who sells a course as being full of a toxic agenda and out there to do anything and everything to try to sell an online digital product, because that person's getting rich every time someone buys it, and they're not really doing it in the interests of the public or the interest of their clients. Of course, this is not everyone thinks this, but in the wild world of social media and the internet, it's easy to think this, easy to be carried away by other people who are mentioning things like this. And of course, sometimes it's difficult to give people the benefit of the doubt if people have been stung by charlatans in the past and they've been stung by online courses which have a bit of a stigma, let alone being in the real estate market, which itself has a huge stigma. So I think that's a little bit misunderstood. I think, from a course perspective, I don't say this in a braggadocious way, but I say this in a very proud, like a humble, proud way, that I have the most social proof in Australia out of anyone, bar none. All right, on various platforms, everyone tagged. I don't want to go into it, but from a client's perspective, if you have a community of 100,000 plus people, you can't fake it for too long. You know what I mean? Maybe a year or two you can fake it, but someone's gonna catch you out. You can't be deleting negative comments or people say, oh, Google reviews you can't be deleting Google reviews in the hundreds, right? At the scale. So I think that's really misunderstood. And the other thing is, although once again, this seems like I'm on my high horse, I really enjoy helping people for free as well. Probably every single 2 days or 3 days, I get a message from folks who are like, PK, I bought in such and such location. The thing has gone up by whatever it is, like 20, 30, 40% in X amount of time. Thank you for your free content. I don't know if you'll appreciate this message or not, but just wanted to drop a line. And they didn't do my course. I didn't make a buck out of them. I didn't make anything out of them. But just to be able to message me shows their character and how grateful they are. And it really, it brings a smile to my face, because it's you're helping people for free. Some people go down that route. Some people get good results out of that. Some people not so much. But regardless, you've helped. And other people you help for a payment. So look, I think that's probably something that's misunderstood. I really enjoy helping my community of more than 100,000 people. You can tell I have the most free content. I don't want to be competing against anyone, but probably the most free content out of anyone in real estate in Australia. And of course, that brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, I love you sharing that. I haven't picked up any of what you said about what you do. Perhaps I'm not looking for it either. But what you can't argue with is results, and they're obvious. But also the intent, PK. I think if the intent and the values are well directed, then there's always going to be people who are unhappy, not because of what you're educating them on, but because what they do or don't do with it. And then we're living in a society in Australia now, sadly, where we're very quick to point the finger and blame something or someone else for things that we haven't done ourselves. I tend to ignore most of that because there is some personal accountability that comes to play in all of that. But certainly, I know from my own personal perspective, I love the information you share. It's all really well qualified. You grab our interest, and then you give us good reasoning behind why you're suggesting certain things. I keep doing it because your success speaks for itself in that regard. But I guess changing track just a little bit. What, if anything, do you struggle with, PK?
What do I struggle with? I think it's difficult to catch people's attention and hold people's attention if you're not, making things flashy. And most of my content is around data. It's littered with graphs and charts and tables. Like across my YouTube videos, I think I would have shared more than 3,000 charts and more than 1,500 videos. So it's hard to capture the attention and bring into the property fold folks that aren't that way inclined. And, not everyone is into numbers, not everyone's into data. And some people could be because it's pretty simple, but they just have this mental block. And so I think that's what I struggle with. And a lot of those people, I call them, maybe it's a cynical term, but I call them like prey. A lot of those newbie property investors, wannabe property investors are the ones who click those Facebook ads from other folks and buy the off-the-plan apartment or house and land package, a million kilometers away from the city or whatever. And it's hard for me to reach them. And I think, I ultimately, they come into the fold after their second, third property because then they're like, oh, this current method's not working. I got to actually go beyond my comfort zone and really understand true evidence-based property investing. But for the first two, they've kind of messed it up. And so that's what I struggle with is I don't like to use the word convincing because, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. You'll never convince someone against their will. But it's hard for me to convince someone who's not into data of how to do things the right way.
Well, I think the key, and I've taken me a long time to learn this lesson as well, PK. But people will only listen when they're ready. And in the old days, I was I was almost evangelical about property because of what I'd experienced with what it had done for me, and I was out there to try and convince everything about the benefits. And I came to realise that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And there's still a lot of people who are looking for instant, quick fix results and get rich quick successes in property. And you and I both know that they don't exist. So it's not until someone's got a blood nose quite often that they're ready to listen, and they're starting to recognise that chasing the shiny new thing isn't going to give them the results they're looking for, and they're ready to get back to fundamentals and let the data do the talking. So no, love that. Something else I'd like you to perhaps discuss is if you can share an aspect of your approach that you're finding a lot of people in the industry don't agree with you about.
This is an easy one. And we talked about this, of course, last time as well. It's really funny. I think a lot of buyer's agents over the many years that I've been doing this have now finally come over the fence and said, actually, you don't need a buyer's agent to buy top echelon properties because nowadays everyone has access to data and everyone can buy interstate without having to fly there. I'm not saying you're not seeing the property or doing your due diligence, but you don't need to fly there. You use building and pest inspectors, property managers. We've talked about that many times before. So a lot of buyer's agents and industry professionals have now clued on. In fact, many buyer's agents that are national agents basically follow my formula to the T for their own businesses, for better or worse. But I think a lot of people still disagree with the concept that you don't need a professional to buy top performing properties. And look, we can go into all the reasons why you don't, and how property investing is more like gardening than being an electrician. You still got to go to Bunnings and get a few tools, but anyone can do their own gardening as long as they're interested. Whereas for an electrician, that's a different type of professional. And certainly buyer's agents don't need a multi-year degrees or diplomas or TAFE courses or anything like that. So it's not in the same category as a surgeon, electrician, etc. So I firmly believe, like I've always said, if you enjoy doing your gardening, if you're a DIY type of person, anyone can get the same results, but I think most times better than even a professional, because no one cares about your money as much as you do. As you said at the start, Bushy, it's really easy to swallow a dud deal from a buyer's agent because you put them on a pedestal, and of course they're going to give you the right deal, right, without understanding their incentive structure. But when you're buying it by yourself, for yourself, with the right mentoring, you're not gonna just accept anything, and because you're really educated. So I think this is still something that's misunderstood, but less so than before. And I think results, and not to toot my own horn, but you just can't disagree, or you can't just deny thousands of results over many years.
100%. It's that old saying: if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. If you teach them to fish, they can feed themselves forever. What it comes down to is really our level of interest and our level of commitment, because if we invest in our education as the first and foremost priority, so that we have the head knowledge to be able to test and try, of course we're going to get better sustainable results. But if you're deflecting that accountability and responsibility and putting it onto someone else because either you're too lazy or you're not going to make the time, then you get the results that you deserve, really, from that perspective. So
and I think people are cluing onto this as well. There's a point that you made before, Bushy, that folks are validating their BA deals through your insight and your mentorship. And I think people are now more clued on to the fact that buyer's agents have a cost overhead, they have offices, they have staff to pay, they have big marketing budgets, they need to get through 30, 40, some of them 30, 40 clients a month just to break even. And so therefore there's a tendency to churn and burn. So a lot of them, a lot of people do my course, even though they don't have time, just to be able to validate or verify what the buyer's agent's telling them. And whether they're going through a buyer's agent or not, just like with yourself, I get, I don't know if it's weird, but I get a real kick out of saying, I don't think this is the right property, right? It's like, because I have no incentive. I don't make money based on them buying or not buying. So, and kudos to those members as well. They are very appreciative, grateful, and they appreciate when you say no to a property as much as when you say yes and give them the go-ahead.
Well, and it's the education of why you're saying no and why you're saying yes. It's
exactly.
The element of our business that's grown very strongly in the last few years is not because I want to. I don't want to grow that part of the business, quite frankly, but there's a need there now, because I'm seeing so many investors getting burnt by buying very substandard properties based on a post-justified story by a buyer's agent or someone else, that I felt the need to step in and start saying, hey guys, let's have a proper look at this. And our role is always to work our way out of a job, PK. I don't need to be doing this. It really breaks my heart when I see people falling for some of the trickery that we're doing. I'm only doing this as long as we have to. And I think with the work that you're doing to educate investors, we'll get to a point where we don't need that second layer of due diligence, because people will have the knowledge themselves to be able to make much better informed decisions, rather than handing the blame to someone else and then suckering the result as a consequence of that. Now, I guess just before we dive into the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about today, just to sort of set the scene from your perspective, and I know we've touched on this before, but what do you think are the qualities, character traits and actions that separate sustainably successful investors from the rest?
Such a big question. The qualities, characteristics, and traits that separate high-performing investors, sustainable investors from the others.
Yeah.
Well, I think first of all, just I'll get to a mindset in a second, but the first thing from a technical perspective is cash flow, right? Everyone wants growth. Growth is the engine. We all know that. Yeah, cash flow, great. You make maybe $3,000 or $4,000 per property. Let's say positive cash flow. Nobody's leaving their 9 to 5 anytime soon based on that, right? You really got to get that growth and have a exit strategy based on either retiring debt, selling down some properties, or being more active and developing or granny flats or whatever the case may be. So I think the first thing I'll say is being mindful of cash flow. And I've really gone out on a limb to try to educate folks that even if your household income is 400K, 300K, 500K, even more, still focus on yield. Because if you're going to buy 2% yield properties, 3% in Sydney, let's say, then sure, you can afford to because, you're bringing in the money on a yearly basis, monthly basis, but the bank is going to penalize you from a borrowing capacity perspective. And so what do you want? You want the largest possible quality portfolio value possible because it's off that future growth occurs. So actually, cash flow is a key feed from a borrowing capacity perspective into getting as large a portfolio as possible from a lending perspective, off which then even more growth can occur. So it's kind of a subtle point, but sometimes obvious, sometimes not obvious. So cash flow, buying high yield deals. Like I have one e-commerce client, she makes like 500K a year and she's still buying sub 700K properties, 6+% yield. And that's because also, who knows, your business may stop at some point, you may become unemployed. And so you never want to have to sell that property. So from a technical answer, I would say cash flow. And from a mindset answer, I think people who are in it for the long haul. I never say that you can pay off your mortgage in 2 years from property investing. I never say that you can leave your 9 to 5 in 5 years, 7 years, sometimes not even in 10 years, 15 years from property investing. I know this is something you're big on. I remember we talked about it last time. Property investing is a lifestyle. You need to create, that lifestyle design, but you also need to make property investing a lifestyle choice. That doesn't mean that it's a part-time job. That doesn't mean that you need to set aside a couple of hours every week, just to check on your portfolio. I don't do that myself. But it's a mindset. It's like every time you hear the news, you gotta, okay, let's go a bit deeper. Let's understand what Bushy's saying about it. Let's understand the data just to maintain our blood pressure and healthy levels. Every time, property values go down in your suburb, which will happen over a course of 10, 15 years. It's like, all right, but let's just always remember the end game. So I think, anyone who's extreme in either giving advice or receiving advice are generally the ones who can't stick it out for the long haul. Balance is not sexy, and it doesn't get me much views or clicks on my videos sometimes, but balance prevails in the long term.
Beautiful points. I think that the key things that I'm picking up on there, firstly, intelligence doesn't equate with success when it comes to investing, because I've seen some very intelligent people earning massive incomes who allow their ego and pride to get in the way of smart investment decisions. Coming back to your point, buying the flashy house with a very minimal yield because it looks good and they can talk about it at the dinner party, but in terms of de-risking their future lifestyle, they're making things worse, and they're putting themselves on a treadmill that what means they're probably going to have to work for a lot longer before they're in a position where they don't have to work anymore. So I think that's a key element in that exercise. And I think the other thing that goes with what you were sharing around that is that I guess the mindset equation of focusing on what doesn't change versus spending all your time worrying about what is changing. Because there are some real fundamentals in investment that pretty much ephemeral. They just don't change. And if you focus on those and stick to those and ignore the noise, so, like you, the biggest risk is looking at your portfolio too often, because you'll make knee-jerk reactive decisions based on fear by doing that, rather than backing yourself and making sure that if all the fundamentals are right and then taking that long-term view, you're going to do okay. Let's now jump into the subjects that I'm very keen to get your views on. And let's go back to the old buyer's agent market making concerns, because following on from the thoughts I expressed in the intro about high-profile buyer's agents who are self-proclaimed experts mostly, and then creating short-term self-fulfilling prophecies and becoming market makers by shoehorning herds of unsuspecting investors into competing with each other to buy what I consider to be low-quality, overpriced and underperforming properties. What are your observations and thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one, because I have to preface by saying I don't have hard data to be able to prove anything, because it's so difficult to isolate buyer's agent transactions and behavior and say these are the properties that did this and these are the properties that did that and they weren't by buyer's agents. So these are hypotheses, and I think I'm throwing it out there as well to you, Bushy, and seeing genuinely, and none of this is prepared, right? So genuinely what you think about my inferences. I think I want to also be balanced and not be negative unnecessarily towards buyer's agents in what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that I feel that it's a good thing that people have more free education online, right? As you said in the intro before, these days on podcasts, YouTube, Facebook groups, so many things, right? You have a lot of free education. I think that really helps people avoid making obvious mistakes. So I think perhaps maybe 10 years ago, and these are made up numbers, 30% of investors would have bought a house and land package because they clicked an ad, or that's what their broker recommended. One of their friends who is a developer, gets kickbacks or whatever, buy a house and land package off the plan apartment. Now these folks are you're talking to their wife or husband or whatever, and saying, "Oh, look, honey, let's just check out this Facebook group, or let's just check out this podcast by this guy called Bushy, or let's just check out this YouTube channel by this guy called PK, and use some keywords and see if we're doing something wrong." And then all of a sudden, a lot of these folks are saved, and maybe that's not the perfect analogy because you and I aren't buyer's agents, but let's say a buyer's agent has good free content. And so now they've not bought house and land package somewhere where it wouldn't have grown, or they haven't bought in a really poor location. Instead of they've bought, interstate, something that's high yield, all the good things that we've been talking about. But the problem is, like you're saying, the concentration of where people are buying is often leading to market making behavior, price making behavior. But my question to myself is, what's worse? These people have been diverted from making terrible mistakes and buying on the whim of those folks. We see their Facebook ads, YouTube ads, where they're selling, all, I won't go into it, but not the best property depreciation benefits and rental guarantees and this and that. At least they're saved from that and they're going to something a little bit better. So I think that there's that phenomenon, right? Where a lot of these suburbs and pockets, let's say in Perth, let's say Armadale, are being pumped because folks have otherwise would have bought in Wallen in north of Melbourne, which is probably not the best idea because you're not going to register that land for 2 years. The build will be delayed for 3 years, costs will blow out, and you'll have regretted clicking that Facebook ad. So I think that's one phenomenon. The other phenomenon I think you alluded to before is I think a lot of people now are becoming property investors because of a lot of advertising online. Everyone's on their phone. Like I myself am on my phone a lot because of my business. And, it's like a vortex and you end up doom scrolling and you just have to slap yourself out of it after 5 or 10 minutes or longer, right? And then they find out about property investing because of their magic algorithms. And then, 6 months later, they end up buying a property. So I think there's more property investors now, and the stats actually show this, versus 5 years ago. So I think that's a phenomenon that's contributing towards a lot of these buyers agents becoming market makers, market shapers, and also just how lucrative the industry is. I mean, you know them, I know them, and look, everyone's got to pay their bills, so I'm not attacking them from a personal perspective, but you become a buyer's agent today, in a year, 18 months, all of a sudden you're getting 30 clients, right? 30 clients a month. And it's like your wildest hopes and dreams have been fulfilled. You've bought a holiday home. You've got a couple of nice Italian sports cars. And, now you got to maintain this thing. It's that fix. It's that greed. A little bit opposite to what you're saying for yourself, Bushy, where you're like, I don't have to do this. Like, you're not really doing it for the monetary outcome alone. But a lot of these folks, because it's new money, it's not old money for them, it's new money. Now they're pumping even more Facebook ads, and now they've got 40 staff. You see these buyers agents advertising my team of 30, my team of 40. And I'm just thinking, all right, I mean, maybe you're paying them $100K a pop, whether that's commission or fixed. They've got 30 people, that's $3 million. All right. So now you got to make at least $6 million to make this worthwhile after all overheads. It's like, that's a lot of clients a month, and I don't see that many good properties, right? So a lot of this phenomenon behind the scenes is, and the main person may be a super nice girl or guy, right? I'm not attacking them from a personal perspective, but this is the commerce or business capitalistic vortex that sucks you in, and ultimately leads to negative outcomes for clients. So, I mean, I've made it a point. I've never advertised on Facebook, never run a single ad on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, any social media. A, because I don't need to, but B, because I know that would just mean that the business kind of implodes. There's just too much demand, and I just also become one of these buyers agents, right? Yeah. So I think those are all contributing factors. Now, is that something that is going to cause property markets, like let's say Armadale, like I referred to before, in Perth, where right now I think more than 50% of all transactions are East Coast investors? And I don't want to poo-poo Armadale, right? Like, my clients have bought there as well, 2021, 2022.
Totally.
They've made a lot of money. Good for them. I don't recommend they sell, but the question is this phenomenon of buyers agents, is this phenomenon even outside of buyers agents, how there's a shortage of housing, prices are rising, are people going to all of a sudden stop buying in Armadale? And is that going to cause a price fall, a price crash? Now, let's say for my clients who've already made, let's say, 90% gains in areas like this, even if it falls 20%, like, it's all good, right? I mean, 90% gains in 3 years are highly unusual in the best of times anyway. Yep. But I sort of feel for the folks who are buying in these areas now. Yes. Not only buying in these areas now, but buying subpar properties, main road, or, like, there's granny flat potential, but there's a sewage line under the backyard, which they didn't know about. Yeah. Or, pick 100 different criteria that aren't ideal. And I don't think these buyers agents are bad people, but I think they're just caught up in their own success, where it's like now they have to churn through these clients to keep that machine ticking along, especially, as you said, Bushy, at the start, where, and this is unusual. I mean, I'm not as experienced as you, and I'm not as wise as you in your property experience, but right now there's almost nothing for sale, right? What was the number in Perth? Less than 3,000 units and houses for sale. The equilibrium is well over 6,000. And I think just houses or detached dwellings is around 2,000. Yeah. And every month, 1,000 sales occur. So if there was no new listings, after 2 months, there would be no properties for sale in detached housing for Perth. So you got this environment where buyers agents need to get clients, and they want to, and they can, because social media makes it so easy. Yeah. People are fed the dream, retire rich, retire early through property, blah, blah, blah. And you got hardly any properties, and let alone good properties. It's kind of like this perfect storm of like some something's not right.
100%. Beautifully said. I love the way you worked through that, because you've covered it off. And again, I agree with you. I'm not having a go at individuals per se or buyers agents. There are some very good buyers agents who genuinely are doing the right thing for the right reasons. But I think part of the biggest issue, there's a timing issue here with those conditions you've spoken about. But I think the model of the industry for buyers agents is fundamentally flawed, because it forces this type of activity. And it, sadly, the reason why I guess I've become very strongly talking about this subject is that I've now worked on behalf of our investors with a wide range of buyers agents. And even those that start off well end up becoming like the others because they have to feed their own machine. And I think it's problematic the way the whole setup is. That there needs to be a revisit on this exercise. Let's take the US, for example, where it's a very different model, where there's almost, in a lot of states, there's a buyer's agent and a selling agent on every transaction, and they share the commission. So it's less pressured for the buyer's agent to do that. And it means then that there's a stronger quality rather than the quantity focus that emerges from that exercise. And, sadly, I've got to the point now where a lot of buyers agents won't work with us if they know an investor's got Bushy Martin and the know-how team attached, they don't want to play. But by the way, we share the same view, because when I see buyers agents that are giving an investor 4 hours to make a decision on a property, there's something seriously wrong in the whole exercise. So I think there's some structural issues around the exercise that's contributing most to this exercise. There's always going to be good people who will still do the right thing, and there are. We're currently working with a number of buyers agents who investors have engaged who are doing a fantastic job, and they're applying that. The litmus test for me is always, I only say yes to a property when I can't say no. Right. I'm looking to say no. I'm looking to are all of these different metrics and all of the key due diligence points being covered? Because if they're not, and it's a big enough issue, then that's a reason to walk away. Whereas because of the structural pressure on buyers agents, there's a invisible hand that's saying we've got to say yes because we need to get the coin and feed the machine. So
it's a hard nut to crack, because, like, let's say in the US, a lot of buyers agents say, well, buyers agents are a good thing, and everyone should be using buyers agent because everyone uses a buyers agent over in the US. But if you actually analyze the market in the US, what you have is the seller, the vendor, actually pays the selling agent or the listing agent's fee and the buyer's agent's fee. Yeah. All right. So there's actually, it's a different model. Yeah. That would never fly in Australia. And the listing agent does almost nothing. The buyer's agent actually almost works for the listing agent to sell the property. For example, if you want to go buy, see an open home, you actually contact the buying agent, the buyer's agent, and they show you around the property. The listing agent's the listing agent has almost no marketing or advertising. They get their money from basically just securing the client who wants to sell, and then the buyer's agent effectively sells it on their behalf. So huge conflict of interest, right? And actually there was a class action lawsuit that happened in the US just a few months ago. And so this whole model is being revised. And in Australia, of course, buyers agents will say we're different because the buyer or the investor pays for our services. So we're a little bit independent. But really you have to follow the money trail, when it comes to incentivization. And so when do buyers agents get paid? They get paid when you buy a property. Some of them are on commission rates. So the more you pay, the more their commission is. So I'm not saying they're unscrupulous or their character is flawed, but at the end of the day, humans are humans, and you got to follow the money, because the money is what really dictates the incentive structure. So this is this is one problem with the buyer's agent industry, where I feel, I feel that they're an extended arm of the sales agents. And if you talk to sales agents, which a lot of investors don't, these guys are having the time of their life, right? These guys are like, this is the best job. This is like, I got to do nothing. I put an off market tag on the property, even if it's online already, and it's going to go out the door. And the buyer's agent says to their client, you got 3 hours to decide. And look, it's kind of disheartening, because the new property investor, or even the experienced property investor, they know it's a hot market. They've been missing out on properties. And so at some point they succumb and they say, I just want to enter into the market.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, buyer's agents will say, but look at our amazing reviews. Look at this property that we've just bought, and it's gone up $50,000 in value in the last 3 months. And so therefore they get the 5-star review on Google and this and that. And that's great. But all of that client happiness experience happens in the short term. But what about 3 years later, when you actually found out, yes, the property went up in the short term, but that was actually on a main road, and you can't sell properties in a down market on a 4-lane main road very easily. Or you find that it's actually gone up in value, but the valuer comes out 2 years later and says, nah, this is on a main road, or it says an easement here, or actually this carport this granny flat is not council approved. We're not going to give you that equity uplift that you wanted. But by that time, the buyer's agents got their good review. They're sailing into the horizon. Business is booming. And who's really going to go back 2-3 years later and be like, update their experience with the buyer's agent? Who's really going to talk about them on Facebook? Who's really going to talk about them publicly? So, and the circus goes on. So, I mean, this is not, I think there are 5% good buyer's agents. I think in any industry, there's sort of 80-20 rule, right? 80% of people are probably not great or okay, 20% top in the buyer's agent industry, because there's really no qualifications apart from a 4-week course, right? You don't need a degree, you don't need a diploma, you don't need any experience, you don't need an IQ test, you don't need anything like that. Like you said, I think there's some good ones. I think they're about 5%, and 95% either, how should I say this? They're trying to do the right thing, but they just don't know enough themselves. Like let's say this guy called PK does a video on YouTube in 2022 about how Perth's going to go up, and then they produce a whole bunch of content, get their clients in Perth, right? Or they genuinely don't care about the customer. But I don't think there's many buyer's agents who genuinely don't care about the customer. I think there's a level of ignorance. So you can't really blame them. To some extent, we can more blame the regulatory bodies for a lack of barriers to entry.
100%. And the industry model needs some I don't have a solution right now, but there needs to be one, because very simply, some of the things that investors need to be asking the question of, if they need or are looking to engage a buyer's agent, how many properties does the buyer's agent actually own over what period? And
can I just interject very rudely, Bushy, and just add to that? How many properties did they get before they became a buyer's agent with their 7-figure income post buyer's agency?
Very good comment.
That is the thing, because it's so sexy to say, and I mean, it's the case with me as well. There's no way I would be 14-15 million portfolio debt free right now if I hadn't have had at least some course income. I mean, I was already 6-figure passive income before I started the course, but definitely not 15 million debt free, right? Yeah. So you got to break it down and say, all right, guys, look, we have to be apples and apples here. I had this portfolio, 120K passive income, back in 2017, 18, 19, before my course really took off. This is, I had 9, whatever it is. Since then, yes, I've grown. I've become quote unquote wealthier, for whatever vanity metric that serves. But some of that is actually due to the course. Or in my case, actually I did some development projects. So once again, you can't really expect to achieve what I've achieved unless you're happy to do development projects, invest this and that. I think people need to be transparent. Otherwise, it's like that 30 properties by age 30. Yeah, I can do that too, without knowing that guy makes $5 million a year. Right.
It's spot on. They're really good qualification. And also talking to existing clients some time ago, anyone who's bought properties post-COVID from a buyer's agent, the buyer's agent is going to be able to brag about the growth. I'm not into anyone with a pulse could have done that. My always focus is let's look at the long-term portfolio potential. And I'm not interested in what you're going to tell me, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer's Agent. I want to talk to some of your long-term clients and have a conversation directly with them. So you're actually benchmarking what the truth, the good, bad and ugly is. Going beyond that, how else do you think investors can better protect themselves and or take advantage of some of this sort of herd hunting, market making behaviour that we're seeing?
Yeah, look, just to tack on one point that just came to my mind in terms of talking with old clients, I think, if you ask, this is a wrong example because I know you're a stand-up sort of guy, Bushy, but if I ask you, Bushy, hey, can you give me like 3 phone numbers of clients you worked with for the last 5 years? Of course, anyone with half a brain is going to give like the good ones, right, that you're mates with or whatever. So I think this is the power of social media. Don't ask PK, don't ask Bushy, don't ask the buyer's agent for their long-term clients. Go and find them yourself. And, if they have a social media presence, like, for example, in my Facebook community, there's 50,000 people, go back to posts where I've, mentioned client deals and tagged them from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and just DM them. If you DM enough people, some people are going to reply, especially if they're unhappy, right? Generally, people reply if they're super happy or unhappy. That's who leaves reviews. So I think that's just something that came. Sorry to digress. How can people better protect themselves, investors protect themselves against this phenomenon? Look, apart from saying the obvious, which is to educate yourself from various sources and educate yourself deeply, I think people should always question everything. I think people are guilty of it with me as well. They kind of put you on a pedestal and say, oh, whatever that guy says or that girl says, because they have a big following, must be right. But I think we live in the age of extreme and of heightened individualism. There's many downsides to that, but one upside is that you don't have to believe what anyone else is telling you, and you should question everything. So, for example, in my case, of course, I don't give properties to folks. I teach them how to find suburbs, streets, properties, and then they validate that with me. But in the buyer's agent business model, where someone is giving you a property, most of the time it's a rebranded CoreLogic 10-page report, which says buyer's agent name, but actually it's the same as CoreLogic. And it has, nothing against CoreLogic, cool charts and pie charts and bar charts and all sorts of cool things. But it's like that the buyer's agent says, here's the link to the property, and here's the research, the PDF, which they have just, automatically generated. Let me know in 4 hours, right? And you're like, you download that PDF, and I know this, Bushy, and you know this. I know they have to me, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, how do I know if this suburb is good? This is just this is just charts. I mean, what's the thresholds? What's the story? What's the narrative? And same with the property. I mean, 3 bullet points in an email isn't going to cut it. You can't just say it's a growth corridor. You can't just say population's rising. You can't just say there's a new hospital being planned. And I think this is the issue. People, they've paid the retainer to the buyer's agent, and maybe the buyer's agent sent them like 3 properties and they've, said no or missed out. And now they start to feel pressure because there's a bit of pressure coming from the buyer's agent. So he's got to get through clients, right? A big wait list. And then you can't really ask the questions. And so then you just buy, and it may be good, it may not be good. But I really encourage people, don't leave your buyer's agent. Funny that I should say that. Don't leave your buyer's agent. I mean, presumably you've done your due diligence. They're a good person, but at least have the self-confidence to pick up the phone and have a conversation, or at least have the self-confidence to go back 10 email threads, right? Back and forth, ask your questions. It's like, okay, I get it that it's a big piece of land. I get it that, it might be 10% or $10,000 under comparable properties, but what makes you say that this is actually going to perform over the long term? Because Perth's going to crack it at some point. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe not the following year. At some point, it's going to correct like every market does. So what's going to make this property stand out? And please rationalize your answer based on evidence. And then all of a sudden, I think if more and more people start doing this, buyer's agents will find, okay, a client doesn't equate to 3 hours of work for $15,000. Actually, it's going to take 20 hours of work, all right, for $15,000. All right, I gotta cut back. I can't take this many clients. I got to actually provide a better service, all right? And I think that could change the industry slowly and surely. But this message that you're sharing with everyone, Bushy, I think this needs to get out more and more and more for enough people to back themselves and treat the buyer's agent as a peer as opposed to a magician.
Love it. Beautifully said. While we're talking about that, and again, I don't want to go into any detail here, but it would probably be worth sharing if you're open to it, but the key indicators and combination of data metrics and trend changes that you focus on to help you read the property tea leaves in order to identify good locations and good properties. Can you share, just whet our appetite a little bit with that?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, at a LGA or you could say a suburb level, it's really important to assess both short-term and long-term factors. I think people know these by now, like, things like days on market, like stock on market, inventory levels. I won't go into thresholds and everything like that right now. Yeah. Even things like building approvals, for example. Yeah, it might be a booming area right now. I'll give you an example, actually. In just north of Adelaide, around Elizabeth, it's an area where famously I said, let's invest there publicly and also to my clients. Lo and behold, Bushy, got my tail between my legs, because that thing basically doubled in the last 2.5 years. But here's the thing. I say, and my clients say, hey, PK, did you get that one wrong? Like, what was up with that? And I say, look, there's an area called Anglevale, and there's literally thousands of building approvals. Now, in the last few years, we've seen builders go bust. We've seen construction costs skyrocket. They've started to hockey stick again in WA and South Australia after coming down, the rate of growth coming down a little bit. We've seen it really hard to get skilled labor to build these things. So if we were in a normal market, this particular part of Adelaide wouldn't have gone up so much or much at all. And the real risk is that now there's about 80% of all transactions done by investors in some of these Elizabeth areas. Why? Because they're basically the cheapest capital city areas that you can buy.
100%.
And when these, right? And when these areas, I could be completely wrong. Let's have a discussion in 2 or 3 years about this. But when things don't go right for those investors, when, let's say, interest rates go up again or whatever, a lot of this was speculation. The prices could go right back down when things normalize with building costs, with construction costs. These approvals in the thousands are going to come out. And so then you're going to have a whole new suburb or suburbs built. And then these areas are going to stagnate potentially for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So look, I'm completely wrong, right? You guys doubled your money. You can't argue with that. There's no doubting that. And for a flip, I don't know how to flip properties based on capital growth by doubling them in 2 years. I can't do that predictably, right? But for those who have, all credit and kudos to them. But it was an incredibly high-risk strategy, and I don't think it's repeatable in the long term. For those who hold, you might find that you underperform. But here's the thing, Bushy, and I think folks like me need to be humble. The underlying problem, like you said as well, is that we just don't have enough houses in Australia. And the demand story in Australia is really shallowed out. The only thing that's keeping the ship alive is there's no houses for sale. And so you've got
supply, really shrunk. You've got demand since rate rises. It has come down. It's not fallen off, but it has come down. But the imbalance is still there. So you've got a lot of uneducated, poor property decisions in what you and I would call normal markets 10, 5, 15 years ago, really disproportionately doing well. And so it's hard to argue with that, but then we still have to ground ourselves in the fundamentals, because property is a long-term hold, 10, 20, 30-year hold, at least the way that I understand and have done it. And so that's how I look at the world.
I love the example you shared, and I full disclosure, I'm very jaundiced. I know Adelaide very well because I lived there for the last 20 odd years or longer actually. And what I think, I love the way you describe the exercise around Elizabeth, because as an Adelaidean, there's a real stigma around that area, and what gets what gets missed, I think, at times is there's a direct demand supply equation, but increasingly sentiment also has an impact, and there almost needs to be, yes, we might have seen some short-term results because the rising tide has lifted what would otherwise be pretty average performing areas and properties. So it's happened despite itself, basically, as a consequence of that. But if we take that long-term view, because the fundamentals aren't there, and there is still some pretty average perceptions of those areas locally, but people in Adelaide don't want to live there. They live there because they have to, not because they want to. And that does have an influence on buyer activity at some point. When it's all about the interstate activity starts to settle down, and it's back to local market activity that's driving it, that's when it's going to get interesting, I think.
Yeah.
So, well, I think there's those mix of exercises that we need to have a look at a point in time. But if we're looking at those fundamentals, a bad property in a bad location is a bad property in a bad location. It might do okay short term, but long term, if we're 15 years plus, it's going to show us colours eventually.
Right. And I have nothing against investing in low socioeconomic areas.
No.
I have properties myself in such areas, so long as they're gentrifying, so long as the long-term story is positive and there's not a glut of oversupply that could come about in the medium term. What worries me, Bushy, is that the three levels of government, as you and I both know, are woefully either incompetent or have no intention to solve this housing shortage. What worries me is that the next 10 years, the fundamentals won't matter and everything will go up, and people will be listening to this conversation in 5 years and being like, nah, Elizabeth still went up. So this is what I'm trying to get my head around, because we're in very unique territory with so much money supply from all the quantitative easing still flowing around. It's not being absorbed. Record housing shortage still in existence. And it's a terrific time to be an investor, but give it maybe 10 years, 15 years, hopefully at some point the housing shortage rectifies or remediates itself. At that point, there could be a lot of blood on the street. That point could be 15 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. Who knows? I'm kind of a low-risk guy, so I don't want to take any chances. I just want to buy good fundamental assets that I know I'll get a tenant. I know that there's not going to be 20 other properties on the same street from other investors where tenants have optionality. I don't want to be up at night.
Spot on. Yeah, no, really well said. Now, just leveraging off what you just mentioned there, I'm seeing increasingly in their media a lot more talk about recession and potential property market crashes. I'd love for you to share your read on economic and property conditions in the medium to long term. What are some of the risks that we're facing, and what is this going to mean to people that are looking to invest in property?
Okay, sure. I think one of the biggest risks is our foreign exchange, or the strength of the Australian dollar versus the US dollar. The US economy is becoming quite weak, and I'm not basing that based on recent stock market tumbles and things like that. But employment data, various other things have started to shift. Whereas just 6 months ago, things in the US was actually doing really, really well. Inflation has come down in the US in a big way. It's almost around 3% now, and the economy is coming down. So I think rate cuts are inevitable in the US. I think the Federal Reserve, they kind of are a little bit more audacious in their predictions than at least the current Reserve Bank governor in Australia. So they've said in September they're going to cut it. They've said that before and they didn't end up doing it. But I think it's really close. In Australia, though, we are linked to the US and the global economy, but we're also our own local economy. And inflation here is not coming down as much as international peers just yet. It is coming down, but it's not quite there yet. And I think the risk to property markets is if the RBA cuts rates because they need to maintain some sort of healthy FX position to buoy our importers in Australia. And so for US cuts, we kind of need to cut. There's a lot of political pressure as well to cut at some point.
Yeah.
Whilst the inflation kind of genie isn't quite put back in its lamp. And that could mean in the short term, property prices actually get another wind, because I don't subscribe to this theory of interest rate rises drop property prices and interest rate falls booms. It's easy for folks like you and me to say interest rate cuts coming, guys, get on the train, another boom. I don't think it quite works that way. No. Although there will be some tailwinds to property prices, because let's face it, people have all of a sudden more borrowing capacity. So those on the margins, they'll get into the market.
Yep.
So I think the risk is that happens, rates get cut, property prices continue, now get a second wind, a little bit, not a boon, but a little bit of a tailwind. But then the inflation genie kind of comes up again, whether that's because of some war and shipping bottlenecks, which have once again reared their ugly head recently, or because the more property prices go up in Australia, of course, the rents go up. Rents are a key contributor in terms of inflation baskets. So that could mean that now there's 6 months from now, 12 months from now, there's another maybe cycle of inflation locally.
Yep.
Because I think the Australian economy is much stronger than the US economy right now in terms of its momentum.
Yep.
And when that occurs, then that really takes the sentiment out of the market, because now people have lost trust in the RBA. They've lost trust that rate cycles are very long and discrete. They don't know what's going to happen. And at that point, there could be then a bit of a correction in property markets. But once again, against the backdrop of a huge housing shortage, like even right now, they've not met their 2024 targets. You still fail to see how prices could come down even in that scenario. So I know I'm kind of painting a kind of a nuanced picture where various things can mean rises and falls. It's tough even for you and me, I suppose, to exactly predict what will happen. But overall, I think that it's best to try to contain property prices for the foreseeable future. I don't like it when being an investor as well. I don't like it when property prices go up double digits every year, because it's bad for Australians, it's bad for our economy, it's bad for our productivity. It's good for the government in terms of revenues and things like that. But it's bad for basically the social fabric of Australia. And we always have to remember, forget if whether we're a good Samaritan and a good citizen or not, but just economically, for long-term prosperity, we need long-term sustainability. And property prices are a key linchpin to that sustainability and driving the middle class. I don't want to sound like a politician, but economies only do well when the middle class does well, right? And right now, to your example with Elizabeth, people don't want to buy in Elizabeth to live, but they're kind of being forced to because they've been pushed out of other more desirable areas. So, yeah, I don't have a Bushy property prices up, 20% next 5 years or 10% or down. But I think it's complex. We're lucky. I think this decade is going to be pretty low risk property investing. But I hope it doesn't boom too much.
Yeah, I really good read, and I would have almost been disappointed if you had come out and told me some definites about this is exactly what's going to happen, because every time I hear someone say that, I get very nervous, because you and I both know there's so many dynamics that are going to influence on the exercise at the global, national and the local level, that it's like trying to predict the weather. But that's why I keep reverting to what's not going to change. Let's focus on the fundamentals, because we've got the Ukraine war happening. We've got China having a lot of challenges, and there's a growing dependence of Australia on China. If China has a cold, we're going to get a headache. There's no question about it. So there's so many moving parts. We've got to try and weave our way through this, and that's where, for me, if you focus back on the lowest common denominators and the fundamentals underpinning it, and you buy good quality properties, and for me, that's not just investment grade, that's having owner-occupier appeal, because we want to be selling our properties down the track to an owner-occupier, not to another investor. Then we're at least giving ourselves the best insurance policy that we possibly can in that event. So, look, we've only just scratched the surface. I love talking to you, mate. It's so refreshing to be talking to someone who has a similar outlook on life and property generally. Would love to do this again, because there's a lot of topics that I haven't touched on today that I would love to. But I'm going to jump into what I affectionately refer as the bushfire ambush round, and ask you 4 quick questions that give you the blindfold and cigarette and jump into those. So the first of those, PK, is what superpower do you wish that you had, and why?
The superpower that I wish that I had is, oh gosh, you put me on the spot here, Bushy. Look, I think if the superpower that I wish I had was facilitating better communication. I think all of the world's problems, many of them are solvable, and they don't get solved because people don't communicate. In the Australian property context, we just got to get like the 3 levels of government, property investors, people on the far left, different opinions in the same room, those who have influence, and actually chalk out a solution. Because as you go up in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I feel weird talking about it, but I kind of care more about the longevity of Australia and the property market rather than making like a quick buck these days.
Yeah, no, great share. If you could have coffee with anyone, either alive or dead, who would you choose and why?
I think I'd like to have coffee with Donald Trump, not because of any political affiliation, but I just want to understand, like, does he actually believe the stuff that he says? And if so, like, that's phenomenal. And if not, like, that's fantastic marketing.
Yes, I'm not even going to touch that subject. I've heard it referred to as the orange maniac, and it feels like a pretty apt description at times. But next question, PK, if I gave you $50 million in cold hard cash right here, right now, what would you do with it and why?
I do what I'm already doing with a lot of, very humbly, with a lot of what we have. We support an orphanage that was started after the tsunamis in Sri Lanka about 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago. So I would actually, I don't know why, I don't actually have the ability practically to start one, but financially I would start more orphanages around those areas. And I don't know the first thing about regulations, but at least I would fund them more.
Yeah, love it. Last question, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would you change about property investing?
What would I change about property investing? I would change, in Australia, I think people are obsessed with property, probably more so than most parts of the world, because it's so easy to make money, both as an investor, but also as a business owner, regardless if you're good or not, and if you have scruples or not. So I would make everyone need to do a 4-year degree and at least some work experience before they could either sell a course or a mentorship service or become a buyer's agent or something like that. I would create some hurdles And I think that would serve the Australian public.
Beautifully said. Last question, PK. If I ask you to get invested, what does that mean to you?
I think it means to really work on your limiting beliefs. I think people have the financial wherewithal to achieve a really amazing lifestyle design, but a lot of it is not achieved because of self-sabotage. And that self-sabotage is mostly due to childhood traumas and things that they've experienced, not because of their fault necessarily in their life. So I think before you can get invested, a lot of these people, including myself, we needed a lot of subconscious and mindset healing. So get invested means to get invested on your internal environment, to me, before you start creating wealth in your external environment.
Well, you're singing my tune there, PK. As you know, I'm a big believer in the intersection of self-help and wealth being the key ingredients to true sustainable success and everything. So that's a great thought to leave us with. We'll make sure we've got all of the contact details in the show notes for those that I know are going to be really resonating with everything you've shared, so they can take advantage of both the volumes of free information that you share, as well as the opportunity to jump on board with your accelerator course. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to dive into that. So thanks again for getting invested, and let's make sure we keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Bushy. I don't do many interviews these days, but I always like chatting with you because I can be myself.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.